Right then, this is the last lesson that will help you to figure out how Hitler came to become the leader of Germany. So we're looking at filling in the booklet, Hitler's rise to power. So far you have looked at the early stages of the Nazi Party, you have looked at the Munich Putsch, you have looked at how Hitler used propaganda, and you have looked at the impact of the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. So all we've got left to do now is to look at a year's worth of events to do with politics, elections, and the Reichstag in Germany, which is going to end in 1933 with Hitler being the Chancellor of Germany, which is like their version of the Prime Minister. So in your booklets, what you're going to be doing is filling in a timeline for the year 1932 to 33 that I'm going to go through with you, and then you're going to create a diagram that shows the steps that Hitler took to get to power. Before we do that, I want you to go to your Hitler's Henchmen page, which is in the booklet. Last time we looked at Joseph Goebbels, which is on the left-hand side, and he was the Minister of Propaganda, so he was in charge of making the posters and things. Can we go to the first box on the right-hand side? We're going to look at Strom. So I'm going to put up a slide that's going to have some information. Can you write down his name, what his job was, and the impact that he's going to have on German history? Okay. So I'm going to read through the slide. You can pause this clip at any point, or you can, you can actually get this PowerPoint from the SharePoint, and you can just work through it without me talking at your own pace. So, name Strom. His role is SA Chief, which is essentially the head of the SA. Which he became in 1931, so that's kind of like when Hitler's running up the election, 2 years away from becoming the ultimate leader of Germany. So he joined the German Workers' Party, as it was known back then, before it was called the Nazi Party, very early on, and he'd been a loyal friend to Hitler. He'd worked with Hitler during the failed Munich Putsch. He had a big role to play in that. Hitler kind of put him in charge of the army for that, the SA. So in return, Hitler officially makes him head of the SA. What was his role? The SA's job was to defend Nazi Party meetings and disrupt Communist Party meetings to kind of stop anybody from getting to the Nazis, essentially. So what impact is this going to have? Well, because he was supported by the SA, it essentially helped the Nazis win the election because, one, people were too afraid not to vote because of the SA were beating people up in the street, and two, the SA were kind of getting rid of the political competition with the Communist Party and things like that. And the SA made the Nazi Party look strong and supported. So you could say they had a massive role to play in Hitler winning seats in the election. By 1933, the SA was 3 million members strong. That's huge. This meant that as the head of the SA, Rom had a lot of power. Rom was a socialist. Remember how the German Workers' Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party? Hitler used to say that he was a socialist and he wanted to get rid of, class system. Really, Hitler was a nationalist and not really a socialist at all. So Rom would always be pestering Hitler and saying, when are you going to put out these reforms? When are you going to start promising to help the working class, making the rich help the poor? This is what socialism is. And Hitler would be like, oh yeah, well, when we get to power, we'll do it. Now, because there's 3 million people as members of the SA, so the Rom is essentially in charge of an army of 3 million soldiers. He's a threat to Hitler. Hitler realizes that if Rom doesn't get what he wants, Rom could take the power from Hitler, and he's got 3 million soldiers to help him do that. So Rom stops being Hitler's friend and becomes Hitler's enemy without Rom really realizing it. In 1934, Hitler rounds up all of his enemies in something called the Night of the Long Knives, which we're going to look at in the next booklet. Now, on that night, Rom is arrested and shot. He's murdered by this kind of new army that's coming up called the SS, and Hitler gives the orders to do that. So it's a very important person, Rom, because he goes from Hitler's friend to Hitler's enemy, who he actually has murdered his own friend. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. But like I said, pause this clip so that you can fill in that part of the booklet. Right, This next bit involves a clip, so I can't play you the clip on the video because it starts to echo. It's like on a feedback loop. So I'm going to upload the clip onto the SharePoint. I'm also going to upload the clip onto CCBC History Instagram page. It is also on the CCBC YouTube page on the playlist Germany. But if you just type in The Rise of the Nazis History channel into YouTube, it should be the first video that comes up. It's a really good animated 4-minute-ish, no, it's like a 2-minute clip. So if you just type that into YouTube, you should get it, and it kind of looks like that. And it's really good. It shows you, from the early World War I essentially, all the way up to Hitler becoming power in 1933. It's going to move on to things that you don't know about yet, so that's fine. So you can kind of ignore the last part of the clip if you want to. Okay, so I would switch to find that clip, and then come back to this clip, or come back to the PowerPoint once you're done, okay? So that clip should have told you what steps Hitler's taken so far to get to power. I'm really condensing it down, obviously, because they did loads in that clip. So he protested against the government's handling of World War I, and he joined the DAP, the German Workers' Party. He then became its leader and organised it into the Nazi Party. He changed the name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He created a logo, the swastika, and he got the SA involved. Right, things are ramping up now. He starts to exploit the effects of the Wall Street crash in 1929, and he starts to exploit the effects of hyperinflation in 1923 in order to make people angry, and they're angry against the Weimar government. He hypes up the existing prejudice that people feel against Jews by saying that it's their fault for everything, they're a bunch of communists, they're going to rebel and kill us all, and they're greedy. He then uses propaganda to gain votes, so posters and speeches. So these are the things that we already know about because we've been looking at them in the booklet. Now things are going to start to ramp up, and these are things we're going to look at today. He's going to win an election in 1932. He's going to join with other parties to become Chancellor in 1933. And in the next booklet, we're going to look at how he takes over from the president when the president dies. So all of this is going to lead to Hitler being the ultimate leader of Germany, named the Führer. So let's go back to number 6, where he's winning the election in 1932. Can you find on your Rise of Hitler booklet, it should be towards the back, actually it should be right next to Hitler's henchman page. There's a timeline, I'm going to sneeze, that's embarrassing. There's a timeline, and it's just like a black strip, and it says 1932 to 33. Now if we were in classroom, I would get the textbooks out and we would read page 38 and 39, and we would just decide what we're going to put on the timeline together, but obviously we are all working from home. So I've taken pictures of the paragraphs and I've broken them down onto the next few slides. So actually I think I'll just go through this with you, and you're going to pick out which bits you're going to write the timeline. You can put them above or below the black strip, that's absolutely fine. I'd like you to write the month and the year that the event is happening, and I want it to be roughly pointing at the right part of the timeline. I think you've got about 6 events, if that helps you, so you could do 3 above, 3 below, okay? Right, first event then. I'm going to read through this together. You can pause it and read it yourself if you would rather, and try and pick out some key events if you'd rather, and then I'll tell you what the answers were there, so at least you're kind of thinking a bit more for yourself. But if you don't feel confident doing it, just go along with me, okay? Right, so political scheming 1932 to 33. Hitler had been quite successful in the presidential elections in March and April of 1932, so they're holding quite a few elections. Like, to hold 2 elections in 1 year is a lot, but they're going to hold even more. He was now the leader of the 2nd largest party in the Reichstag and was well known across Germany. Remember, the Reichstag is their political building, it's their version of House of Parliament. Right, July 1932. A general election was called for the 31st of July 1932. The Nazis were optimistic about improving the number of votes that they had won in the previous election, which was in September 1930. There was a lot of violence in the run-up to the election, so I'm imagining that violence was probably between the SA and the communists, but there could have been other people involved too. About 100 people were killed and more than 1,000 were wounded in clashes between political parties. On the 17th of July, there were at least 19 people killed in Hamburg, which is a city in Germany. More people. Should we stop there? Okay, so I'm going to rewind. So I've picked out that top paragraph there. So I would go for July 1932. And I think what's probably worth picking out is an election is called and a lot of violence happens in the run-up to that election. And then I think we'll do a second event, which is what the results of the election will be, which is that bottom paragraph. So the first thing I would put on my timeline is July 1932. A general election was called. There was a lot of violence in the run-up and about 100 people were killed. So pop that down on your timeline. While I have my cup of tea. Right, I'll read the next bit at the bottom there, okay? So this is going to be the second thing we'll pick out. So, the election, remember the election is being held on the 31st of July. More people voted in July than in any previous Weimar election. The Nazis won 230 seats and were now the largest party in the Reichstag. You can see at the table at the bottom there, they've got 37% of the overall vote, so they've got the majority. However, Chancellor, remember Chancellor was the second most important job you could have in the Reichstag. It's like their version of Prime Minister, and the President was the most important job though. The Chancellor in 1932 was a man called von Papen, and he was in charge of something called the Centre Party. He hadn't won the most seats, but remember the President can decide who the Chancellor is. The Chancellor doesn't get decided by the election, but obviously the sensible thing to do is for the President to choose the Chancellor of the largest party. So, despite not having won the most seats, Chancellor von Papen did not relinquish his post, and he actually began to scheme with President Hindenburg. Hindenburg and von Papen did not like Hitler and didn't want him to be Chancellor. Hitler demanded the post of Chancellor. He was like, we've won the most votes. It makes sense that people would like me to be the Chancellor. Why are you still making it von Papen? However, at a meeting with Hitler in August, Hindenburg refused to contemplate this, despite Hitler being the leader of the largest party in the Reichstag. So I've condensed that to the 31st of July 1932. The Nazis won 230 seats and were now the largest party in the Reichstag. Hitler demanded to be Chancellor. And then I've gone to August 1932. Hindenburg refuses to make him Chancellor. So those would be the next two things I would pick out. Pop on my timeline. Okay, pause it if you're not finished yet, but I'd like to move on, otherwise it's very awkward silence on the clip. Okay, next paragraph. Right, von Papen and November 1932 elections. So, it's not possible for any party to command a majority in the Reichstag, and it was impossible to maintain a coalition. Von Papen knew he couldn't form a coalition with the Nazi Party. So von Papen dissolves the Reichstag, so shuts down the Reichstag in September 1932 and holds new elections, which he sets for November, so a few months away. So in that time, like, the politicians don't meet up to discuss laws and things like that. Von Papen had the opinion that if he waited a few months, the Nazis would start to lose momentum, they would lose support, and therefore they would get less votes. And if he held on, they would slowly disappear from the scene. He was correct about them losing momentum, as the results of the November elections show. So if you look at that table there, so July, they had like 230 votes. November, they've got 196. So they have lost some, but they are still the most popular party in the Reichstag. But they obviously haven't got the majority anymore. So I would probably just say November 1932, Chancellor von Papen holds another election, hoping that the Nazi Party will lose seats. They do, but it's still the most popular party. That's kind of how I would summarise that one there. So I would pause it and get that on, otherwise I'm going to move on to the next one, okay? Right, I'm going to pick out 2 things from this. So I'm going to do the first paragraph, which is very weird, and I'm going to show you how to condense it, and then we're going to do a little bit of that. Hitler becomes Chancellor at the bottom. Right, so von Schließer, I think is how you say that. However, von Papen could still not secure a majority in the Reichstag. So there's been 2 elections now, and he's still not got the most seats in the Reichstag. So he hasn't got the most power. At the same time, Hitler continues to demand that he should be Chancellor on the grounds that the Nazi Party was the biggest in the Reichstag. When von Papen suggested abolishing the Weimar Constitution, so that means, well, let's just get rid of, you know, that diagram that you copied down with Article 48 and who gets to vote for who and who's got the most power. He was like, let's just get rid of that, because otherwise Hitler's going to be in charge. So wouldn't you rather just have me in charge than that? So a man called Kurt von Schließer, who's the Minister of Defence, tells President Hindenburg that he can't do that. If he does that, there's probably going to be a civil war. Like, sides are going to form, we're all going to start to fight each other. So President Hindenburg thinks von Papen's doing a pretty rubbish job at being Chancellor, so he asks him to resign. Von Schließer then becomes Chancellor. Von Schließer wants to bring all the opposite parties together in a core front or a cross front. So he could bring some people from the left and the right, and he thought they would all live together in perfect harmony. So that's like asking, you know, Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson to be friends. It's not really going to happen, is it? So von Schließer I don't think he's going to do a particularly good job. Right, this is how I would kind of summarise all that. So November 1932, still on that same month, Chancellor von Papen was forced to resign for not dealing with the situation, is kind of how I would summarise it. The new Chancellor wanted to bring opposite parties together. I think that's kind of how you'd summarise it there. Okay, so again, pause this so you can copy that down, otherwise I'm going to move on. So, next paragraph, Hitler becomes Chancellor. Von Papen was determined to regain power. He did not like that he was forced to resign. He didn't like it so much that he was willing to kind of meet with his enemy. So he thought, either I have no power or I share power with Hitler, because let's be honest, Hitler was the person that should become Chancellor. He's got the most powerful party in the Reichstag. If I kind of get friends with him, then I can share the power with him. So he meets with Hitler in early January in 1933. At the meeting, it was decided that Hitler would lead a Nazi nationalist government and von Papen would be his vice-chancellor. Scheming and plotting now took the place of considered open political debate. The army, major landowners and leaders of industry were convinced that von Papen and Hitler were saving Germany from Schließer's plans and a possible communist takeover. The idea that von Schließer's government might include some socialists was appalling to them. So, bear with me here. I pick out January 1933 that von Papen and Hitler meet. There's a tiny paragraph missing that's going to come up on the next slide. So what they do when they meet, well, actually you could fill that in because there's a little bit there. They decide that they're going to join together and that von Papen will be Vice-Chancellor and Hitler will be Chancellor. But there's one more thing I want you to add. That's why I've done a ... So, von Papen was going to go and convince President Hindenburg that a coalition government with Hitler as Chancellor would save Germany and bring stability to the country. Von Papen said to President Hindenburg, "Don't worry, I know we didn't want him to be Chancellor, but I will be able to control him." He actually was quoted as saying, "I would make Hitler squeak." I imagine like a squeaky toy, like he'll control what he says and does. So he genuinely thought that by merging with Hitler, because Hitler, you know, hadn't really had that much power before, that he would be able to tell Hitler what to do. So even though he was Vice-Chancellor, essentially he'd be Chancellor. But this is Adolf Hitler we're talking about. There ain't no one that's going to control Adolf Hitler. So it was a very silly, kind of arrogant thing for von Papen to think. But he does convince President Hindenburg. So on January 30th, 1933, Hindenburg allows Adolf Hitler to become Chancellor of Germany. He was leader of the largest party and he had been invited to be leader by the president himself. Therefore, he had achieved his aim of becoming Chancellor by totally legal and democratic means. He had been voted in and there to be the largest party, and then he had been chosen by the president, so it was all completely legal and through votes. So nobody could say that Hitler became the leader of Germany through illegal means. So if he wants to take power for himself now, he can, because there is nobody else to blame but the people that voted for him, even though technically he tricked them into doing it. So I would put January 1933, von Papen and Hitler met. They agreed to join together to take the Reichstag. Von Papen would be Vice-Chancellor and convince President Hindenburg that he could control Hitler. And then 30th of January, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. And we've got a famous cartoon there where you've got President Hindenburg is the man in the long jacket with a hat, and von Papen is the man in the suit, and they are both carrying Hitler on their shoulders. So if Hitler's high up, that suggests that he's got the power. If they're shouldering him, that suggests that they are supporting him, they helped him get into power. But I like the way that he's kind of pushing them down, squishing them with his hands, which shows that he is actually going to take the power for himself. And then if you look at the background, you've got members of the SA. So it's kind of saying that he's got the power and he's got the SA on their side. So these two gentlemen who got Hitler to the place of power are not going to be there very long sharing that power with him. Hitler's going to take that power for himself. So I like that cartoon, that's a good one. Okay, so that's the timeline all done. What I'd like you to do now is to go to the very first page, so the cover of your Germany Hitler's Rise to Power booklet. And I'd like you to fill in the questions, please, that are on the very front cover. So describe the early Nazi Party, tell me how Hitler changed the Nazi Party early on, who were the SA, how did the Great Depression help the Nazi Party become popular, how did Hitler use propaganda, and how did Hitler become Chancellor. So pause this clip here so that you can fill those in, and then I'll go through the answers with you afterwards. Okay, so if you describe the early Nazi Party, you might say that they were small, that there weren't many members. You might say that they had socialist ideas, so they wanted the rich to help the poor, and they were anti-Semitic, so they were anti-Jew, and really angry about the war as well, didn't like the government, the way the government were handling things. How did Hitler change things? Well, he became its leader in the 1920s. He changed the name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, later on the Nazi Party. He created a logo, the swastika, and he built up its own private army, and obviously he built up memberships through his speeches and things like that. So he made them more popular. So who were the SA? The SA were the Nazi Party's private army, disguised as gymnasts. They wore brown shirts and swastikas, so they had their own uniform, and they would go on marches at rallies to show how powerful the Nazi Party were. They would defend the Nazi Party if they were under attack, and obviously they would attack other political parties as well, such as the communists. There we go. How did the Great Depression help the Nazi Party become popular? It showed how rubbish the Weimar government were. It made people not support the government again. It lost people jobs and made people poor. And that meant that they were desperate enough to look for alternatives, even if that alternative was a little bit out there and risky, like the Nazi Party. How did Hitler use propaganda to gain popularity? Very easily. He gave speeches. He put his ideas on posters where he would promise people things that they needed, like work and bread. He promised that he would get them out of the Depression. He would use propaganda to blame Jews for all the problems that they were facing, and to show that the Nazis were strong and Germany was strong, and the Nazis would make Germany stronger if they were voted for. He also kind of painted an image of himself, didn't he, of being strong and heroic, like a heroic soldier who was going to lead Germany into the future, even though he was like the opposite looks-wise of a perfect Aryan German. Very clever. How did Hitler become Chancellor in 1933? You could say that he won the election in 1932 through votes. and then he made a deal with von Papen to become Chancellor if von Papen became Vice Chancellor. So President Hindenburg made him Chancellor in 1933. Boom, job done. So go back to the Hitler's Henchman page. So if you go just after that, it's a blank page and it says create a diagram on Hitler's steps to power. So I want you on that page, blank page please, to create a diagram that shows how Hitler came to become the leader. So I want you to go all the way back from the beginning, where he, you know, was like a soldier looking for a political party to join, and how he joins the DAP, and then he ends up being the Chancellor in 1933. Now I've said I want you to show at least 5 ways, but if you're looking at those examples that I've got on that slide there, I mean, one person's done 10. So there's a potential for a lot more. It's completely up to you. This is going to be a really good revision aid for when you want to revise this booklet really quickly. So I would spend some time doing this because, you know, we're all at home having lie-ins anyway, and you don't have homework. So I would spend some time being as creative and as detailed as I possibly can, but a minimum of 5, please. For each one, can you provide the date? Just the year is fine. You don't have to do the month if you don't want to. Provide a description of the event. So if you're doing like the Munich Putsch 1923, can you just do a very quick, you know, look at the ones on the examples there. They don't have to be big. Just, you could say Munich Putsch, Hitler tries to take over the Weimar government. And then, as an extra, and I would suggest we all do this, can we explain how it got him power? So Munich Putsch, Hitler tries to take over the government. It makes him famous. Yeah, something like that. Be as creative as you can. So this person has done like a road, but it's his speech bubble, so it's all the things that he's done. So that's quite nice because it hints at propaganda. So propaganda is a method that he used. I really like the one at the bottom, which is like that famous evolution poster where you've got the ape to the man. So this one goes from an ape to Hitler. And then they've just kind of just been really simple with how they've written it around. There's others as well, so I'll post quite a few examples on the Instagram page for you to kind of sneak ideas from, but just kind of do it the way you want to do it. You could do literal steps, you could do ladders, I mean, whatever you want to do. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 steps. If you can't remember, go back and watch that clip that we saw at the beginning. That literally has the steps that he took, and use the examples that I'm going to pop on Instagram. Okay, so that's that. Once I've stopped talking, that will be the end of this clip, and then apart from the exam questions at the end of this booklet, which obviously we're not doing because they're new and I need to be able to teach them to you, then you have finished with this booklet. So please keep this booklet safe. Put it in a file if you haven't, if you've already bought a file. Keep it somewhere safe if you haven't. I will be setting a different type of exam question, one that you've already done before, which I'd like you to complete. Either email me or do it on forms so that I can mark it and actually put a mark in to go for schools for you. Okay, so well done. These clips are always here, so you can go back and play them multiple times. So by the end of this week, which will be 24th of April or something like that, I would like your Hitler's Rise to Power booklet to be completed, please, apart from the exam questions on the back. Thank you very much for listening, Year 10, and good luck.